10 journeys where weather, distance, navigation, and survival erased the expected ending. This countdown moves from number 10 to number 1, with each archive leading into the next. We begin with the aviator who vanished near Howland Island. A pioneering flight ended with radio calls, empty ocean, and no confirmed wreckage. Amelia Mary Earhart was an American aviator and aviation pioneer who became one of the most celebrated figures of early flight. In 1928, she was the first female passenger to cross the Atlantic by airplane. In 1932, she became the first woman to make a non-stop solo transatlantic flight, and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her achievement. She was one of the first aviators to promote commercial air travel, wrote best-selling books about her flying experiences, and helped found the 99s, an organization for female pilots. The archive kept the evidence even after the witnesses were gone. A vanished aircraft leads to an expedition whose ship disappeared but whose crew did not. At number 9, the expedition that lost its ship but saved every man. Shackletow's ship was crushed by ice, yet the entire crew survived. The Imperial Transantarctic Expedition of 1914 to 1917 is considered to be the last major expedition of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Conceived by Sir Ernest Shackleton, the expedition was an attempt to make the first land crossing of the Antarctic continent. After Roald Amundsen's South Pole expedition in 1911, this crossing remained, in Shackleton's words, the one great main object of Antarctic journeyings. Shackleton's expedition failed to accomplish this objective but became recognized instead as an epic feat of endurance. Its strangest detail is also the reason the story survived. Shackleton's complete rescue gives way to Scott's fatal return from the South Pole. At number 8, the South Pole race that ended in tragedy. Scott reached the pole, found another flag, and faced a fatal return journey. The Terra Nova expedition, officially the British Antarctic Expedition, was an expedition to Antarctica which took place between 1910 and 1913. Led by Captain Robert Falcon Scott, the expedition had various scientific and geographical objectives. Scott wished to continue the scientific work that he had begun when leading the Discovery Expedition from 1901 to 1904, and wanted to be the first to reach the geographic South Pole. He and 4 companions attained the pole on the 17th of January 1912, where they found that a Norwegian team led by Roald Amundsen had preceded them by 34 days. History remembered it because the ordinary rules failed so visibly. Antarctic tragedy becomes Arctic starvation at a station cut off from relief. At number 7, the Arctic expedition reduced to 7 survivors. A scientific mission became a desperate fight against isolation and starvation. Its purpose was to establish a meteorological observation station as part of the first International Polar Year, and to collect astronomical and magnetic data. The expedition was under the auspices of the Signal Corps at a time when the Corps Chief Disbursements Officer, Henry W. However, that did not deter the planning and execution of the voyage. The fact stayed unusual enough that the legend barely needed help. From polar isolation, the route turns across Australia and a relief camp missed by hours. At number 6, the expedition that crossed Australia and collapsed. Explorers crossed a continent but missed their relief party by hours. The Burke and Wills expedition, originally called the Victorian Exploring Expedition, was an exploration expedition organised by the Royal Society of Victoria, RSV, in Australia in 1860–61. The exploration party initially consisted of 19 men led by Robert O'Hara Burke, with William John Wills being a deputy commander. Its objective was the crossing of Australia from Melbourne in the south to the Gulf of Carpentaria in the north, a distance of around 3,250 kilometres, approximately 2,000 miles. At that time most of the inland of Australia had not been explored by non-indigenous people and was largely unknown to European settlers. That is the kind of detail history hides in plain sight. A documented continental disaster leads to an Amazon disappearance still surrounded by theories. At number 5, the explorer who vanished searching for Zed. A celebrated explorer entered the Amazon looking for a lost city and disappeared. Percy Fawcett was a British officer and surveyor experienced in the Amazon. He became convinced that a sophisticated ancient city existed in Brazil. Fawcett called the suspected civilization Zed. In 1925 he entered the Zinga region with his son Jack and Raleigh Rimmel. The party sent a final message from a camp before disappearing. Searches, oral accounts, and theories never produced a confirmed answer. The archive kept the evidence even after the witnesses were gone. The jungle mystery climbs to Everest, where one question sits above 8,000 meters. At number 4, the Everest climbers who vanished near the summit. 2 climbers disappeared high on Everest, leaving one enduring question. Mallory and Irvine made a summit attempt during the 1924 British Everest expedition. Noel Odell last saw them moving high on the northeast ridge. Cloud closed around the climbers, and neither returned to camp. An ice axe believed to be Irvine's was found in 1933. Mallory's body was discovered at about 8,155 meters in 1999. Whether either climber reached the summit before disappearing remains unknown. Its strangest detail is also the reason the story survived. Everest's unknown final hours lead to a mountain camp abandoned in deadly cold. At number 3, the mountain camp cut open from inside. 9 hikers fled their tent into deadly cold under still debated circumstances. Overnight, the group cut their way out of their tent with knives and fled the campsite, inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall, strong winds and extreme cold temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius -40 degrees Fahrenheit. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia while the other 3 had been killed by physical trauma. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force, elemental force, had caused the deaths. History remembered it because the ordinary rules failed so visibly. A mystery on land gives way to a cruiser lost at sea after a secret wartime mission. At number 2, the sinking followed by days in shark-filled water. A cruiser completed a secret mission, sank, and was not missed for days. USS Indianapolis, CL, CA-35, was a Portland-class heavy cruiser of the United States Navy, named for the city of Indianapolis, Indiana. At 0015 on the 30th of July, the ship was torpedoed by the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-58 and sank in 12 minutes. Of 1,195 crewmen aboard, about 300 went down with the ship. The remaining 890 faced exposure, dehydration, saltwater poisoning, and shark attacks while stranded in the open ocean, with few lifeboats and almost no food or water. The fact stayed unusual enough that the legend barely needed help. The countdown ends in the deep Atlantic, where recorders waited years to explain a modern crash. At number 1, the airliner lost in the Atlantic for 2 years. Investigators needed deep ocean searches before the recorders revealed what happened. The incident, which occurred on an Airbus A330, happened because inconsistent airspeed indications and resulting miscommunication between the pilots led to an unrecoverable stall. The Brazilian Navy recovered the first major wreckage and 2 bodies from the sea within 5 days of the crash. The aircraft's flight recorders were not recovered from the ocean floor until May 2011, nearly 2 years after the accident. The crew reacted incorrectly to this, causing the aircraft to enter an aerodynamic stall which the pilots failed to correct. That is the kind of detail history hides in plain sight. That was Top 10 Expeditions and Disappearances. Every story in this countdown began as a shorter archive, but the connections only appear when the files are placed together. Subscribe for the next collection.